All right, welcome back. And in this part of our course, we are going to start talking about classes. All right, we have worked on the space shoots movement just by using a few variables and just knowing conditionals. Now, what if we want to add some bullets into our game? Let's try to break it down. Let's go back to our script and see what we can do to add a bullet. Okay, so remember that when we started this course, I talked about variable and I mentioned that whenever we want to store something, that is when we need variables. Variables are things that can store data. Now, that will mean that if I now want to store a bullet, right? So if I want to store a bullet, I also need to define a variable. Now, my question for you is that what is the type for bullet? Now, remember when we are actually declaring variables, we need a name and we need a data type. We have talked about numbers, name, true or false, these different sort of data. Now, what is the type of bullet then? Just think for a while, pause the video and come back. All right. So bullet is basically an object. Is it a number? No. Is it a name? No, bullet is not a name. It's an object. Can it be true false? No, it's an object. So when it comes to something like this, um, we don't have any predefined data type, right? So it's not a number, not a name, not a boolean. So what it is, it's a basically bullet is a bullet itself, right? So that is when we need a class, right? So class is basically it's a user defined variable. Okay, so you define it. All right, so when you want to create a bullet type, you need to create one for you. Now how can we do that? Well, now if I start from here in my script, go back in the first line in my script that mentions public class player. So you have already used class, but we never knew that we have been using it. So when we say class, that means this player object has these properties, right? And these methods. So this whole thing basically defines a player. So we have created our own definition of a player. So class is basically our own definition of something. All right, so I'm just going to write that down as well. Our own definition. All right, so yeah, so if that's the case, let's go back to Unity and create a bullet class. So right click, create C# script, and now we can create a bullet. And if I go back in my script, we can see now we have just like another class like the player. Now we have something called bullet. So now we have a user defined variable that we have created by ourselves. Okay, awesome. So yeah, so now just like we created variables, we can do the same for this sort of like a bullet variable, right? So now we can create a bullet variable. Let's create a bullet variable. I'm going to do public. I'm going to do bullet because remember, class is basically the user defined data type, right? So we have created this user defined data type bullet, and we are just going to give it a name. I'm just going to name it bullet with smaller b. Now in object oriented programming like C sharp, we call these things as an object. So what happens is that when we create um, a variable of a class, that is basically a reference in our memory, that is basically the object or the or the actually, yeah, an object or a clone or a reference of that particular class. So class is basically a blueprint of an object. An object is basically, that entity that keeps the reference. If this like seems a little bit confusing, don't worry about it. I'm going to talk more about it and you're going to get familiar with it eventually. But just for now, remember, class is basically a user defined data type that we can create by our own, and just like other variables, we can create a our class reference. Okay, so far so good. Let's see what we can do with the bullet. Okay, so we can go to the bullet now. This class does not do anything just yet, right? Because we haven't added anything inside the class. So the player has a reference of bullet, but the bullet does not have anything yet. So we're not going to have something, meaningful. So let's add something meaningful. A class can have two things like a class has, these are called the properties, not property, maybe attributes, and it has some things it can do. We call them methods. Right now, attributes are basically the variables. We have already seen how we can define variables. What can a bullet have? A bullet can have, for example, speed. Okay, so let's create a variable called public float speed. What else can a bullet have? A bullet can have a sprite, but we have already seen that we can simply drag and drop sprites, so we're not going to bother about that. What else can a bullet have? A bullet can have a damage value, right? So how much it can damage, how can make a damage to the player. All right, so we can create a damage value for that as well. Yeah, so what else? What can a bullet do? Our bullet can move, and we already seen how we can make something move in a particular direction. So again, pause your video here, and I want you to think about how you can make this bullet move upwards, right? So when our player creates a bullet, we want the bullet to go upwards. So pause the video here, try it by yourself, and come back when you are done. Okay. Okay, so what is the solution? The solution is simple. So we need to change the basically the transform of this bullet, right? So it's going to be just like we did for our player. Transform dot position is going to be transform dot position plus vector 3 0, and then we need a speed. We have the speed as already. We need that threshold value, and then we need the z. Oh, we need to put f because it's a floating type. Okay, yeah, I hope this makes sense. And if we save our script now, go back to Unity, we don't have any bullet entity yet, right? Or bullet object yet. So for example, we have this player object, you can see it. Everything in Unity is a game object, but we don't have the game object of the bullet. So that means we cannot see it. So let's create a game object for it. So we are going to take one of the bullet. So this is the bullet for this spaceship. So I'm going to take that one, and I am going to maybe flip it in Y direction, or maybe not, forget about it. Yeah, so now this is our bullet. So currently if I play the game, this bullet is not going to do anything because this is just an image. It does not have the brain, right? The brains are basically the scripts itself. So I'm going to drag and drop the bullet um, script into my game object. This is the second way of doing it. Last time we saw we could add a new component, or we can add a script by dragging and dropping the bullet in this inspector. You can also do the same by dragging and dropping the script on top of the game object. Same thing. All right, so I'm going to give it a speed of 5, and the damage should be 1 for this particular bullet. Okay, so now if I go to my player, I can see there is a empty um, field here for my bullet. Oops, you can see it here. Let me zoom it a little bit so you guys can see it, if I can. Yeah, so as you can see here, we have this bullet script in here, right? So, oh, not this one, my bad. The player, and the player has the same stuff here. We have a reference for the bullet. We need to add the bullet object in here. So, well, drag and drop the bullet in here. So that is going to be the reference of this thing. And now if I play, we can see this thing is going up, right? This is going up because we have added this script inside the bullet, inside the update gets called every time, so we are adding up some value um, each time we got the update method. Okay, so yeah, now what should we do is basically, you see, although we have added the like bullet inside our player, it doesn't do anything. Actually, we cannot spawn a bullet. So now what is a spawning means, you see, this is a game object, right? So when we are like dragging and dropping a game object from our asset folder, then we are creating a game object into our scene. But how about when we try to, for example, try to shoot, then we need to do the same thing, but we want to do it in runtime. So when we press space in runtime, this bullet object will get created. So that is called spawning. So next up, in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how we can use a knowledge of conditionals, and using that how we can implement this spawning, right, with some other methods. All right, so yeah, I'll see you in the next lecture, and keep practicing, and yeah, I'll see you next lecture. Bye.